Welcome, Stephen. It's great to have you here and a real pleasure that you could make it. It's great 5 years after you took over EOH that we can probably sit and smile and have a lighter hearted chat about the journey. I don't think too many people would probably have predicted the outcome of where EOH would be today.
Thanks for having me, Zaid. Yes, it has been a tough journey, but at least we can look back and go through the experiences and smile about it. I think even the banks, even the lenders have learned out of it just as much as we have.
So, Stephen, when you took over as CEO in July 2018, not too many people would have predicted what the journey in the next few years would have looked like for EOH. For you, as the incoming CEO, what was your view or perspective of EOH prior to joining to when you actually took the seat as a CEO?
Very interesting question. In the due diligence that I did, obviously, having been a banker for 25 years, I went back and spoke to my customers and said, what do you think of EOH? Who are they? And everyone came back and said, great company, do great work, probably a bit fragmented, too many different, companies, so very hard to see what the whole is. But overall, good people doing good work and delivering well. And that was the main reason why I thought when I got asked to come and operationalize it, take these 282 companies, create a proper strategy, create a proper listed corporate. I mean, it's what I'd done for years, was really fix and build. The other thing that was very interesting about the company is they had a big employability drive.
Right.
And they were being very successful. They had something like a 72% success rate on training unemployed and actually getting them jobs. And I thought that would be, quite a cool thing in this whole 4R industry, right in the middle of it, with the president wanting it done and having his own, a commission. That's what I was expecting. And clearly when I got there, it took me a little while to work out that there was a problem in the accounts. And I know people like you had counseled me going in that as lenders, you had some issues, I should have a look and everything. We didn't really get into the real detail and understand it until Megan came in as the new FD. The thing that really surprised me the most was the fact of the head office corporate fraud. And that was a lot worse than I thought would be in a corporate. In that industry, there's always a bit of things going on and you work hard to close them out. But I was very disappointed when that whistleblower came out in early Feb, and it was true.
And so I guess going in with such a perspective before to very quickly learning, what some of the challenges may be, what steps did you actually take to address some of the financial governance as well as operational issues? And how did that fit into your overall turnaround strategy?
One thing I'd promised myself is ever I became the group CEO of a listed company, if things went wrong, I wouldn't put it all on my own shoulders because I've seen bigger and better people than me fail by taking it all on their own. The first thing was I had to get rid of all of the board and all of the management that were involved. They would always be seen as complicit. And I didn't want to, in a situation like this, have to look behind my back the whole time. So we started first with the board and then the management. And then the most important thing I did, I realized that we were in a very difficult space for the industry, that the industry probably hasn't experienced what we were about to go through. And that's maybe some of the failings of some of those international companies who didn't really sort it out here properly. So I went to go and find the best I could to fill positions. So it's like going and hiring Lewis Hamilton to be your Uber driver. You had to get someone who was almost too qualified. So for Chief Risk Officer, I went and got Fallon Newman, ex-bank CRO. Megan Apadigadu came out of Mixed Telematics. She had listed them on the NASDAQ. So she had, good, a strong background. And then we made sure we backfilled into those positions really good people with really good experience. That then allowed me to rely on them. They say you always got to hire people better than you, etc. But when you're in a crisis, If you've fallen out of the boat and you're rolling down the rapids, you can't be shouting to the guy who's piloting the boat to come and fetch you how to pilot the boat. You've got to have someone who can pilot the boat. And that's, when I look back, was definitely the best thing I did, because then I could really rely on people to do all their bits. So we ran in parallel rather than in series, and that made a huge difference.
Taking everything you've said, I mean, a company that was really flying, okay, employees must have been really upbeat. You come in there as a new CEO and pretty much break it to them that there's actually a big problem, right? A company that's got a lot of debt when the problems obviously arose. Communication, Stephen, we always talk about is so important. How did you communicate to your employees, to shareholders, to the banks about this change and the reality? And how did you deal with some of the resistance or skepticism that may have come about?
The senior people had an inkling of what there was a problem. And I think the fact that we came out so openly and transparently, didn't try and hide anything, was a big relief for them. Because the company was a whole lot of individual companies, and the fraud and that was happening at head office, they were still doing good business with good customers, and so they carried on. It was one of the reasons I think we survived. So with them, it was just being honest, telling them what happened and how it went. Shareholders obviously massively disappointed, but I mean, they couldn't do anything other than they must either sell the share or they must hold the share. They had to make a decision. And a lot of them sold, and some people bought in. And you saw in the beginning, I mean, we had, I think when we announced the fraud at our half-year results in 2019, our share price went up 131%. I think it's the single largest one-day rise in the JSE's history. So we've also got some other trophies. But it was so volatile as people tried to get their minds around it. And once again, we just said, this is what happened, this is what it looks like, this is what we're going to do. And if you have a look at all our results presentations, they were just very, very similar, showing as we found detail, gave the detail, the good, the bad, the ugly. There was nothing that we tried to hide. We didn't normalize and all that kind of stuff. It was, here it is, but this is where we're going. This is where we came from, this is where we're going. Lenders, I think, were the most difficult, but in a way, they didn't have a choice. I remember going to see them, and I'm not sure if you were in that first meeting or not, but you might have been, but certainly some of your people were, in that I can't trade my way out of this. I didn't make this problem, so either you give me time and we can report and we can have discussions, and if you ever think there's a better way to do it, tell me. But if you think there's a better person to do it, tell me as well. And I think that was a good conversation. I was also, because of my history in the industry, able to go to the group CEOs of each of the banks, give them a story, tell them what was going on, happy to do my best to get your money back, but you have to help me, And I think the communication thing, you talk about it. I mean, there's only three things you have to do in a crisis. It's communicate, communicate, communicate. There's nothing else, because you get feedback on what people don't like, what people do like, what their worries are, what you should be thinking about. And actually that collective information is massively helpful.
Stephen, Standard Bank has been a key partner to you for many years, your primary banker. And obviously, I guess, being a banker yourself at some stage of your career, for many years of your career, Standard Bank has assisted in stabilizing the capital structure, both through equity via the rights issue, as well as through debt, where we've obviously refinanced all the other lenders out. How important has this been for you on EOH's turnaround?
Yeah, so obviously it was a long journey. I think the best thing that, and the reason why we preferred Standard Bank to do the refinancing was through the whole journey from the beginning, you separated your product and your credit from the relationship. So I always had access into people like you who would then organize the head of risk, the head of investment banking or CIB at that time, or whoever I needed to see to be able to tell my story. And telling the story is the most important part, because then it gives it context. And if I have a look at all the banks, even the one that I used to work for, I got more access here quicker every time I asked for it than anywhere else. And that, I think, was a real differentiator from a starting point, more because I could get people's unfettered views. If you go into the risk people or the credit people, they're living it every day. And so there's a lot more nervousness of today rather than sensibility about the big picture and the future. And that was really helpful. The second bit clearly was just obviously getting the timing right. Because if you remember, as we were getting the last of the sales done, COVID hit, and that delayed the whole thing by another 18 months. And 18 months of interest on a lot of money is quite difficult for a 10% EBITDA company. And so that patience and that guidance helped. And then obviously getting the decision to actually go into the rights issue and be supported on it and helped on it. I mean, it's been a game changer, because now we've officially closed out the capital structure. We're back to normal. We can get on, and walking those things together, you can get quite too close to it. And it's nice to always have a sounding board or someone who's not in the business. So I think it's massively important. And if you think about it, I was actually just having a chat to some clients today, and they were just talking about some of the negative press and everything. And, their perspective is you should be happy for all the jobs you saved. And I think that's something Standard Bank should think about when you go through these difficult processes. They don't always happen on purpose. And actually, there's a lot of people out there very honest, and the banks can be very powerful in helping save lots of jobs. And this is certainly in our case, you were a big part of that.
Stephen, I guess leadership is always sometimes spoken about. I guess when it often doesn't work out, there's a lot of feedback on why, when it does work out, people sometimes overlook it. I think we all know that there's such a reliance on management and leadership. From a personal perspective, because I don't want to just say that it's 5 years. I think, as you just highlighted, it was 5 years where you went into something that you didn't anticipate. It was 5 years that included COVID, and we all know how that's impacted us. But for you personally, from a leadership perspective, what are some of the key lessons you learned? And perhaps as you learned those lessons, what are the messages you can send out to people just in terms of leadership and why it's so important through this journey?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think there's a big difference between leadership and management. Leadership, sometimes you've got to get out front and lead. Management, you're just directing the traffic. And that's fine in a incoming tide, but it's not very good in an outgoing tide. Some of the key things for me was always communicate, but communicate clearly and honestly. Don't sugarcoat and don't pretend you know stuff when you don't know stuff. If you don't, you don't. In that way, you actually get a much better conversation and a much better feedback. If you're always telling people what they want to hear, then they're not going to get involved because they've heard what they want to hear. So that was the first thing, and a lot of communication. I mean, it's interesting that a small company like ours got Newsmaker of the Year in 2020 for all the effort we did in our communications. And that's quite an amazing accolade if you think about everything that was going on. The second thing, which is always a cliche, but only if you've been in a crisis will you understand it fully, and that is really do hire good people. Take time to hire people, because it takes longer and more stress to get rid of them than actually getting people on board. And actually it takes a lot of pressure off you. I mean, one of my things has always been my sort of big, hairy, audacious goal is to see if one day as a CEO I can get no emails, because then I've delegated properly. And then I've got time to think and time to strategize. So, good people. The third thing that is really, really important is, as a leader, sometimes you just have to make decisions, and they might be unpopular and you might get them wrong. But if you don't make a decision, No one knows where they're going. If you make a bad decision, at least people are going in some direction together as a collective. You can always change a bad decision. You can't change no decision. As Michael Jordan says, he's missed every basket he never threw. And I found that the most challenging thing, especially through COVID, making decisions like 20% pay cuts and having to live that. It's tough, you know, it affects people. But if you look back, they were exactly the right decisions. And fortunately, you know, with a good board and good team, I was able to discuss those decisions, get a view. But at the end of the day, I had to own it. Might have been horribly wrong, but I had to own it. And that's what you have to do. You've got to believe it, do your work, get the data, make a decision, and run with it.
So it's been a tough 5 years. Obviously, it's all not over. I mean, there's still much more that can be done. But where to from here for EOH?
So what's very interesting is the best thing that happened, you know, one of these tough decisions we had to make was when the Zondo Commission asked us to go and testify. It could have backfired horribly. It was a real nervy decision, but we decided to do it, not knowing that we were going to be so unique in doing it. I really didn't expect that, but we were. And we didn't ask for the accolades because, I mean, that would have been inappropriate. We didn't know they were coming. But just those few sentences in the Zondo Commission report fundamentally changed our view from customers. And you can almost see it. I mean, last half, we grew 17%. This half now, as we said in our announcement, I can't talk about it yet because it's still coming out, but we grew above inflation. And those are the first 2 halves of growth that we've had in the 4.5 years that I've actually been here. And so growth is really important. I would put growth ahead of EBITDA any day of the week because EBITDA, the more EBITDA that you make, the more tax you pay, and that doesn't grow your business. But if you can invest in your business like we are now for the first time, you can grow it, and that eventually gives you the scale and everything. So that's the exciting part now. We're in like the heart of the 4th Industrial Revolution, and we're a very broad company. And so now it's about expanding internationally, expanding locally, getting closer to our partners, and making the business bigger again.
Stephen, it's always been about business, and that's generally the focus, especially when things aren't going great. It's difficult, and I don't think many people would understand how the last 5 years may be for yourself and obviously your leadership team. But while I have you here, I'd love to understand, there must have been moments that were not just tough, but where Stephen said, shucks, I'm throwing in the towel, or this is not worth it. Whether those happened or not, and I assume they did, how did you get through those moments?
That's a big question. Listen, there were many moments where you didn't know you'd make it through the month. You didn't know whether your customers were going to paint the whole of the EOH with the same brush, as opposed to the people who were actually in the EOH making a problem. It was very difficult. You get through it by not personalizing it. You know, I always say, you work to live, you don't live to work. And so if you don't personalize it, it's just a process. It's like climbing, I think I wrote the thing in the newspaper, it's like climbing Mount Everest. When you start at the bottom, you think you never get to the top. But every day you take a step, you move forward, just don't stop moving. And you need good people around you, and you need people that you can discuss things. So that's why, you know, going back to one of your earlier questions, being able to get access to people who are not close to the thing, explain it to them and get their reaction helps a hell of a lot, because otherwise you get very much in the detail. But for me, it wasn't about that we were definitely not going to fail. It was about, if we fail, you've got to fail having put your best effort in. And that was really all I could do. And yes, you've got to change a lot of things, and you've got to keep on your toes, and you've got to make a lot of decisions, but you've got to have a support system. Otherwise, you can't do it. People who internalize it and try and solve it themselves out of embarrassment or whatever, I don't know, you'll never do it.
Stephen, thank you. That's been your journey. I think from myself, a really big thank you to yourself and the team. I think you guys have done a great job at EOH. As I said, it's not over. I think there's much more that still can be done. But it's been a privilege to be partnering with you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for taking the time to share with us on your journey. We don't often have these type of feedback discussions on how tough situations actually work out. It's probably easier now than when we went through the last 5 years and some of the tough discussions we had. But I'm glad to see where it is, and well done to you and the team, and all the best on your journey. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Zaid. And also personal thanks for you, because you also put a lot of effort in to make sure that we got the access and we got our message across and everything. And those little things actually count a lot, and hopefully Standard Bank will reap the benefits.